We have no title.
It's now streaming live on Facebook.
Maybe. It says setting up your meeting for Facebook Live.
Mine says, yeah, no.
Mine says meeting is now streaming live on Facebook.
Cool. See, I'm looking at the Facebook screen right now. So look at that. All right. So welcome, everyone. As I mentioned earlier, but I know a couple more people have come on since then, we are experimenting with trying to stream this video live on Facebook so that in future, when we have evenings like this where we are offering it to be open to the public, we have a better way to direct them, or an easy way to direct them to go and see it. So if you are uncomfortable with your image appearing on a Facebook Live video, I would suggest you turn off your camera. Also, I suspect it may be that anything that shows up in the chat where the little message pops up at the bottom, that may also go on Facebook. So don't send me any secret messages during this that nobody else is supposed to see, okay? Because I know you all were going to do that. So I want to welcome everybody. This is our first evening where we are going to have some presentations by, in this case, our two music directors. I think Aaron is first and will be speaking about practice strategies. And I'm going to just turn it over to him. So let me find that little button where I can spotlight Aaron. All right, you're up, Aaron.
All right. Hi, ICO and guests visiting us from afar via the wonders of the internet. It's great to see everybody. I've been interested in talking about practice strategies for quite some time with this ensemble because a number of you have approached me over the course of the time I've been with the ICO, just asking for little tidbits, recommendations, things of that sort. And so it seemed like a very logical topic for one of these sessions during our COVID closure. So I recognize that talking about practice strategies might be just slightly less contentious within the profession as talking about politics these days. There's a lot of opinions about the best way to practice, and people have very strong held opinions about it. So I throw out the caveat that this is just my take on this, and feel free to use as much or as little of it as suits you, and know that there will be always somebody out there that will disagree, and I'm totally fine with that. If you have any questions throughout the span of the session, feel free to unmute and ask your question. But I'm hoping that I can take us through a process that basically spans before practice starts, during, and then immediately following a practice session. So here goes. So many of us tend to practice harder, not smarter. And we've all heard that adage before. And the goal is to get done what you need to accomplish in your practice session, also maintaining your endurance and other things like that are just sort of like basic maintenance concepts in is, relatively speaking, as short a time as possible, because many of us are super busy and don't necessarily have hours every day to devote to practice. One of the first general topics that I think is important to point out is don't practice the parts you already know. We encounter that a lot more frequently than you'd imagine. And even spending lots of time in music schools, I can't tell you how many times walking through practice room hallways, and even with very accomplished musicians, hearing them run through parts that clearly they can play. So it's kind of a waste of time. A periodic refresher is always good of those parts that you know, but definitely not a daily routine. Another big topic, how do you eat an elephant? I ask my students this all the time. And there's one answer to that: one bite at a time. After they finish saying, well, you don't eat elephants. It's whatever. But one bite at a time, okay? So don't attempt to practice the whole piece every time you sit down to practice. That's gonna just set you up for failure. And it's gonna set you up for a frustrating experience. Success requires a healthy and efficient routine. And I mean, that's true for just about everything in life, I realize, but so too with practicing. And the last big kind of ticket item before we get into our little before practice discussion is that practicing is very frustrating. I remember fighting with my mother almost daily at the piano bench. We've all been there. It's frustrating because the results are rarely immediate. And we, in general, like immediate results as human beings. And we like to see progress right away, to feel good about the things we're doing, and to know that the time we just spent was well spent. So I'm hoping that as we go through these three categories, before, during, and after, if you can incorporate a few of them into your routine, that you might find that even though you may not notice after one session immediate results, that over time you will notice that you don't have to spend as much time to get the same amount done that you had been previously trying to accomplish. So before practicing, and forgive that this presentation is more of a list style presentation, and I'm going to share this document that I composed with Julia so that she can email it out to you folks, so that you can just have it as a printed document as well, so you don't need to necessarily feel like you have to scribble some notes down as you're listening. So first of all, and every pro under the sun will agree with me on this, find high quality recordings of the piece that you're practicing and listen frequently. That's a number one, extremely important part of the experience. We have this remarkable resource at our disposal, which is recordings, which, not terribly long ago, our colleagues didn't have those readily accessible to them. And there is this school of thought out there that, well, if you're a real musician, you can do it without a recording. And okay, whoop-de-freaking do is how I feel about that. I mean, we have this resource. Okay, we have the best medical care under the sun, and Civil War era doctors were able to save lives. So let's do Civil War era medicine. It doesn't make any sense. We've got these resources, let's use them. And in many cases, particularly the repertoire that we're playing in the ICO, there are scads of recordings of the same piece. So you could listen to a different recording every day for a month of the same piece, potentially. While you're listening, follow along in your music some of the time, but also some of the time, just simply close your eyes and listen. And I think it's important to differentiate between hear the music and listen to the music. When you're doing this, don't let this be something you're doing the dishes while listening. Dedicate a little bit of time before you sit down to practice to actually doing nothing but listen to the piece of music, so that you can listen really deeply, not only to your own part, but you can listen to everything else that's going on in the piece of music. And a significant part of rehearsal is always learning everybody else's parts. But a lot of that can be done in advance of rehearsal if you're really familiar with the piece itself by listening to the recordings. And definitely check in on these reference recordings from time to time. It's not something you do just before you start off on practicing a new piece and then you never do again. Periodically listen. Just don't fixate on one recording necessarily. Unless the conductor has said, this is the interpretation we're going for. Try to vary it so that you're not trying to replicate exactly what's being done, but you're just actually learning the composer's intentions. Do a little research on the piece before, and on the composer before you start your practicing. This insight can kind of help you gain some background and insight on how the piece came together, or maybe what the composer really wanted from the piece. So that you kind of have an idea of where to get started. Every performer, even in an orchestra, has some artistic license at their disposal. And particularly if you know it's a solo, you might want to learn a little bit about what that solo is all about if there's something written out there. And in a Google search, for many cases, will yield lots of information. And it might even help to answer some questions you didn't even know you had about the piece or about the interpretation or about the intent of the piece. You want to look for repetition right off the bat. So scan your part. And again, you'll notice you haven't played a note yet. Okay, so you're scanning your part, looking for repetition. You might find that, like, if you learn the first chunk of the piece, you've also already learned the last chunk. And so all of a sudden, if the piece is 4 pages long, okay, now I only really have to learn like 3 pages of the 4. Because I've already learned it once. The end is never exactly the same, but sometimes it's close enough where you chop, what's the expression? Chop once, use twice. I think that's a Rachel Ray thing for cooking. Like chop your garlic, chop all the garlic at once, and then use a little in the sauce and a little in the green beans and all that. It saves you a little bit of time. Composers will also often use motives, right? So, the same rhythm will come back many, many times, even if the notes themselves, the pitches change. Or it might be a pattern of notes that comes back the same way every time, but the rhythm changes. So again, that kind of repetition where you can say, oh, if I can get this pattern of notes under my fingers, I actually have more of the piece tackled than I thought I did. So it can help to make the piece feel a little less overwhelming. Scan the part several times, okay? And try to address any questions that come to light before even touching your instrument. It seems like you're wasting time, like you're sitting there like, I should be playing. But really, this work will help. A couple of other things, even for rehearsal, I recommend to a lot of my students to bring us like a small notebook to rehearsal, and it doesn't have to be big. It can be the size of a cell phone, just a little pocket notebook, and create an entry for each rehearsal you attend. And I would recommend dating it, and then as you're going, you're like, oh, measure 34, jot that down in your notebook. And then before you know it, by the end of rehearsal, you might have 5, 6, 60 measures identified that you feel uncomfortable with, that have become very clear to you in the rehearsal. Even if you've done all this prep work, there's always surprises, tempo surprises, or other little things that come up, or you get distracted by something that's happening elsewhere. So if you've got this little notebook, you have one go-to place to check and to mark down things. And then as you learn a measure, you cross it off, and it's just like a to-do list. You can kind of keep track of what you need to focus on. Again, going back to this concept of don't practice the parts you know, focus directly on the stuff that you don't know well, and this can help you to kind of organize those thoughts. I've seen some people, put brackets around measures or star measures, and I personally, I find that after a while that my page gets so cluttered that it becomes distracting. So that's why I gravitated to this little notebook thing. I can just sit right there on your music stand, and you just quick lean forward and jot a measure number down or something like that. This is also a great place where you can jot down like a concept that might be discussed in rehearsal. If you're not quite sure how to effectively mark it in your part, you can jot it down and then go back to it later. Or if it's something that it's good to know, but you don't feel like, after a few rehearsals, you'll need to keep seeing it written there on the part, then the notebook might be a great place to jot those ideas down. It's amazing to me just how much of a mental barrier the instrument case can be for starting a practice session. And with certain instruments, particularly of given fragility or having small children at home, or pets, or whatever the case may be, or you like to practice next to the bathtub, I don't know. I recommend, if possible, and if you're comfortable doing it and there's a safe place, to keep your case open. Now, again, humidity, string instruments, that can be tricky, I appreciate. But if you feel comfortable, if you're in a scenario where that's possible, just having the case open with the instrument sitting there, or if you have a stand for your instrument and it can be on a stand and not in the case, that might be a good option for you. That way it's ready to go. You can just pick it up and go. You don't have to actually unpack it every time and then pack it up every time. Again, caveats on safety there, but that's something that sometimes works for folks. And they realize, oh man, every time I walk past it, I can pick it up and play a couple bars. Mindset. So much of practicing is about mindset. And I really believe that you shouldn't practice unless you're in a mindset conducive for practicing. So if you're tired, if you're grumpy, if you're frustrated, if the house is just chaotic, if your mindset isn't great, your practicing isn't going to be great. It's just not. And this is a recipe for wasting time, not actually accomplishing much. I feel that if I have half an hour carved out for practice on a particular day and I'm tired, I'd rather spend 10 minutes of that 30 minutes taking a power nap so that when I wake up, I can hit the ground running and my 20 minutes left really counts, as opposed to attempting to practice under less than ideal mental or physical conditions. Again, smarter, not harder. This is an important part of that. And I know we're all busy people and it's hard to carve out time, and when you do, it sometimes catch as catch can, but this will help a lot if you are able to find a way to practice at a time when you're in a good place. If you're a morning person, try to maybe get up a few minutes early and practice it early in the morning. Or if you're a night owl, save your practicing till late at night, whatever works for you. And then the last part of the pre-discussion here is starting every practice session with the end in mind. And this kind of revisits the concept of listening often, so you know always how your notes are fitting into the whole. It will always be more enjoyable if you can hear the piece, if you know it that well that you can kind of hear the piece going in your mind as you're playing. Maybe not perfectly, but you can kind of, where you are within the scope of the piece. That will make an enormous difference. And the other part is setting goals. And coming back to this little rehearsal notebook, this is a great place where you can actually write down some practice goals. And I don't mean for this to sound juvenile. And I have a couple studies here that I've had for years. And the pros talk about doing these very same things. Having a place where they actually write down their plan of attack for that practice session. And some of them even go so far as to write down 3 minutes, 5 minutes for this, 12 minutes for this, and it all adds up to half an hour or 20 minutes or whatever they end up having. As you map out your sessions, thinking about what you hope to accomplish by the end of that session, what you hope to be prepared for by next rehearsal. So hopefully that's a few practice sessions between rehearsals if possible. And then maybe what you want to have prepared by the end of the month. Again, revisiting the concept of how to eat an elephant one bite at a time, knowing that you're not going to learn the whole piece in the first week of practice. It's unlikely and unreasonable to expect that. But if you've listened many times and you've started attacking the piece before that first rehearsal, you're going to be in a much better place to sight read and to really dive into the music. And setting those goals and using it having it actually written down is a great way to police yourself. So that's sort of the pre-routine that I subscribe to. So for the practice session itself, okay, the general process is basically reduced to this. When a problem arises, stop playing. Don't try to keep going, stop right away. Work to identify the cause of the problem. Often it'll go something like this. Ba-da-da-da, whoops, ba-da-da-da, whoops, ba-da-da-da, whoops, ba-da-da-da, whoops. We kind of just, and by that point, you've learned it the wrong way 4 times, as opposed to stopping immediately before you play it the wrong way one more time and going right to the root of the problem. And what I mean by that is not just saying, oh, I played that note incorrectly, or oh, I played that rhythm incorrectly, but saying, why did I play that note incorrectly? Is it an awkward fingering? Is it a rhythm pattern that I've never seen before? What is the actual cause of the problem? So once you've identified the cause of the problem, create an exercise for yourself. Okay, and those exercises don't have to be publishable quality. It can be something as simple as I'm going to back up a note and I'm going to get into it. Back up a note and get into it. And back up a note and get into that note. Back and forth 120 times until I can't help but play it right every time. I can't make the mistake ever again because I played it so many times the right way. And then exit that note into the next note. And then 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, over and over and over again. So you're really super laser precision targeting the problem spot. And the repetition piece that I've kind of already hinted at is the 4th part. So stop, identify, exercise, repeat over and over and over again. So that's kind of the generic practice process. And you can apply that to almost any situation that you encounter along the way. Tone, and again, having read several studies on this and taken plenty of lessons, tone is always a great musician's first priority. No one cares how fast you can play. No one cares how accurate your rhythms are if your tone stinks. But if you have the most gorgeous tone and you make a rhythm mistake here or there, it's forgivable. So it's sort of like the tone is that first thing we encounter. It's either gorgeous or it isn't. So I always encourage people to focus on tone if you're not sure where to get started, and making sure, and about getting started, I mean, like, you've got your notes and rhythms figured out. Where do I go next? tone. Let it be about tone. I already talked about this kind of into and out of technique, and practicing the treble spot. Okay, but never adding more notes until you're able to play that spot 10, 15, 20, pick a number times over and over without a single mistake. And that kind of precision practicing, again, seems like a waste of time. When you've got 4 pages of score in front of you and you're fixating on 3 beats, it seems like a royal waste of time. But I promise you, you will fix it and it will never be a problem again. Versus, well, I kind of gloss over it and I get to the concert and I still can't really play that part. Okay. For every challenging passage, I already talked about that. Another technique you can try if your endurance isn't to a level where you're able to play a lot without stopping, try singing through some stuff. And no one's asking you to be Marilyn Horne, but just try singing through the rhythm. And it might not even be on pitch. It's just singing through the rhythm. Instead of sitting there with your violin or with your clarinet and trying to play the rhythm, take an element out of the equation completely and just focus on the rhythm itself and just try to sing through it. Ba, 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 ba. And then over and over again. And then, man, when you put the clarinet to your face or the violin up, I promise you, you're gonna nail it. You're gonna absolutely nail it without having the frustration of manipulating the equipment on top of it all. So you're basically just adding an element at a time. Always include some technique, flexibility, tone production exercises, all those things that you may remember from lessons over the years or from ensembles back in school into each of your practice sessions, because this is we're always working on technique, right? It's something that we just can't avoid. And one thing that I also recommend, if you don't sight read each time you practice, I highly recommend it. And I've included a link here in the little handout for sightreadingfactory.com. If you're not familiar with it, it's $35 for the year, for one subscription for the year. So it's very inexpensive relative to some other programs. And you can set all of the parameters for levels of difficulty, in terms of what kinds of rhythms you encounter, what kinds of range you encounter, and it'll spit out short 4, 8, 12 bar excerpts. So you don't have to spend more than a minute or 2 on sight reading every day, but the more you read unpredictable music, meaning stuff that you haven't looked at before, the better your reading will get, which means in the long run, your practicing will become more efficient because you'll just be a stronger reader. So that's something I would recommend. As best as possible, see if you can hear it before you play it. Okay, looking at the part, you've listened a lot, you've practiced it a few times. Now, before you start to play it again, see if you can kind of hear it in your head, how the line goes. Because you will be more, and this is especially true for wind players, in terms of the brain has this magical power to just get the face to conform as it needs to. And so if you can hear it in your head, more accuracy will come. Okay, the other big one that nobody ever likes to hear, practice slowly. We never practice slow enough. It's always too fast. So I don't think I need to say more on that other than same thing, 10 times at that tempo, 10 times perfect through the excerpt, then up at a couple clicks. And same thing, 10 times perfect, then up at a couple clicks. If you rush the tempo thing, you will never learn the passage. I can assure you that. And another thing you can try is fast passages in music. You might want to try learning them. Once you have them really comfortable, push the tempo just beyond the goal tempo so that when you get to performance, you can just sit back a little in tempo and feel really comfortable with it. So that's just another strategy that works for tempo. Pace your practice around what works best for you. Some people work best in 10-minute increments. Some people work best in hour-long sessions. Maybe it's a mix of both for you, but most pros agree that many short sessions, and when I say that, I'm again, you know what I'm saying. It's like focus on very specific and very literal and simple things, one thing at a time. Something else you can do is practice with a partner. Sometimes it's helpful. You can coach each other. And you can do that on Zoom somewhat accurately. You can't necessarily play together, but you can at least play for each other. You can mark your part. Some people are afraid to mark their parts. Now, I talked about a practice notebook. Yes, that's a good thing because there are things you want to mark in there that you don't necessarily want to muddy up on your page. But there are other things you definitely want to mark in your part. If a bowing changes, marking that in for sure. If a dynamic changes, a little X with the new dynamic marking, absolutely. And try to develop a system of abbreviation if possible. What I mean by that is I see it sometimes, more with my own students, I'll admit, than in our orchestra, but play this section a little quieter. Playthissec, literally written out in the part, as opposed to finding a symbol. There is a symbol for almost everything in music. Try to use the symbols because you will find all of a sudden there's less clutter on your page. And the less clutter, the less distraction. And the less distraction, the more you can focus on the task. And the last part for during the session is try to record yourself from time to time and listen to your performance if possible. If you've got one of these guys, you've got a recording device. Okay, so you don't need to have a fancy recording system to do this. A simple voice memo on your phone will do the trick. And you'd be surprised what you learn about your own playing if you hear yourself play. Both good and bad. There's good too. Don't forget that. There's always some good in there. If for whatever reason recording is scary to you, we can go scarier. Play for your family members and see if they can offer some feedback. Even if they don't know a lot about music, they can tell you if something sounds good or something doesn't sound so good about that. And that is, any feedback is better than no feedback. So those are some tricks and strategies you can use within. I tried to keep them fairly generic because, specific instrument techniques, that's another discussion. These are just kind of general principles. And so for immediately following your practice session, and this list is fairly short, try to revisit your session goals. And again, I know, I hate it too. It's like when you're at a seminar and then they make you write your goal, and then at the end, you gotta mail it to yourself and revisit it in a month. Honestly, I don't ever do it. Those kinds of things. But try to force yourself to revisit your goal after your practice. Did I get there? Knowing that, like I said earlier on, it's rarely is progress like instant, and you might notice glimmers of progress, or you might notice a little progress, but you might not be quite at your goal yet. But if your goal is, I'm going to play this one measure correctly by the end of this session, if it kills me, that might actually be possible. But the very next practice session, I would probably start at that bar and make sure that it wasn't a fluke, that the next day I can actually do it. So that takes me to the second point. That is a great time to plan your next session because it's all fresh in your mind. Yep. I feel like I've got that. So I'm going to just quick start with that next time to make sure I really do have it. But this part is I'm still struggling with. And today I was fumbling these two notes, so you can make a couple quick notes there so that when you sit down and you have those precious 15 minutes out of your crazy day, you can open your thing and be like, oh, that's right. Right to here, hit it, and then you're done. 15 minutes was productively spent accomplishing something versus playing start to finish, and not actually accomplishing anything by doing that. Don't fixate, let the struggle go. Log it in your notebook and walk away from it. And don't think about it again until you come back for your next planning and then practice session. Your mindset will almost always be better when you go for your next practice session. You might be fatigued from practicing either physically or mentally. It can be very taxing. Even 10 minutes can really tax you to a point mentally where you're like, oh, I got to walk away from this. You're not in a good place necessarily to try to solve that problem. So walk away from it, log the problem, and worry about the solution the next time when you sit back down. And in that notebook, notate any questions that come up so that when we're in rehearsal, you have them right there in front of you to remember to ask the conductor. Because all too often people will say, oh, I had a question at home and I can't remember what it is now. I hope it'll come back to me in the midst of rehearsal. The meantime, they're playing the part wrong. The whole rehearsal, 2 hours of wrong, as opposed to jotting it down and quickly asking the question before rehearsal. So again, it's all about being efficient. Here endeth the lesson. So that's the session. It went a hair over half an hour, but and again, I will send that all out to you because I know it was a ton of information. but I'd be happy to take 5 minutes or so and answer if there are any questions, or if you have any follow-up, or if any of you have a strategy that you feel works really well before we turn the floor over to Madeline for her presentation. Thank you, Swan. Don't let practicing get you down. Just be smart about it. Just be super smart about it. And when you see the document here, I think it'll all kind of, you can wrangle it, take what you want, throw away what you want, and never hesitate to email or reach out to either Madeline or I. If you're struggling with the process, we are eager to help with that. Okay, thank you all.
I guess I can say some things about taking notes. And this only applies, I think, to me. I'm the only one who has this, but I think this is the future, and it's so much easier to write notes because you can annotate in color, which stands out, and make as much marking as you want and erase as you want. And I found that really useful. Put a colored marking on the side indicating something to look over because it's hard. And then I can just go back on my couch and just casually, oh, let me try figuring that part, and something like that.
That's a great point. And Swan, you should definitely check out this system he's got at a break when we're back together again, because it's really quite impressive. And his system is impressive too for marking things. So.
And yeah, it is expensive. So like, see that color? I just marked that color as a measure that I wanted to look at, for example. And then I have little, I'm not sure if there are any accidentals or other stuff. Like,
oh yeah.
Come on, color. It's too bright. Can't see. Maybe you can see some numbers where are the beats on that one, etc. But you can go crazy and not have to worry about mucking up the music that you have to return after or whatever, or having a color pen.
Thank you. That's great. Wonderful. Well, I guess Madeline, I think we're ready.
All right. Do I get a spotlight too?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Hang on, I got to take it off of Aaron, remove spotlight, and now I can spotlight you. There you go.
Thank you. Good. So many times in my life, I've had people come up to me after concerts or just when I'm trying to do something else, and they say, why does an orchestra need a conductor? I mean, don't you just wave your arm in the air and then they play? I mean, after all, they have all the stuff written in their music. They don't need you to tell them what to do. They just got it right there in front of them. And it's just, and you get paid for doing that. I mean, I can wave a stick. It doesn't, it's no big deal. But I have a list of what conductors are and what conductors do. So conductors are musicians. A lot of people don't think so, especially orchestras, but conductors are musicians who have studied every aspect of music. Most of them have been excellent instrumentalists themselves, and they need to be well-versed in the theory and the history of music and understand all the instruments and all the musical styles that have existed in the history of music. They need to be able to break a piece of music down into its component parts and be very familiar with all the pieces of all of the Western music that's been that is to be performed. And some even need to know several foreign languages. In orchestra music, the differences you encounter are largely the results of different conductors. The conductor's responsible for determining how fast a piece is going to go, what the balance is going to be between the sections. Are the strings supposed to be louder than the woodwinds? Should the cellos be standing out over the trumpets? Good luck. So the different balances, the volume levels, how long each note is to be held, the phrasing. How does the piece go? What's the direction of your phrases? The dramatic pacing of any piece of music the orchestra plays. And these combined ideas, all of this stuff together, is called interpretation. And so the major job of a conductor is the interpretation of a work that's set in front of you during an orchestra rehearsal. A conductor should also have a great ear. It's better if they have two great ears, but even one great ear is a good thing to have. Great people skills. Now that's where I stand out, because I think that that's something that I do so well. And then they need to have an effective baton technique, and they also have to have a detailed understanding of the orchestra organization, so they can answer the questions that people are always throwing at them after concerts, during rehearsals, all that type of stuff. There are lots of stereotypes about conductors. The ones that I've collected over the years. The conductor is a dictator. Conductor's very mysterious. Don't approach the conductor. Okay, don't do that. The conductor is almost magical. That's my favorite. Here's one that applies to me. The conductor is old. The conductor is elitist. And my favorite, the conductor is male. So that's, most of these things are not true. Stereotypes make conducting a very mysterious thing. No, we don't stand up and just wave a baton. We have lots of things we do. Don't be ashamed if you find yourself wondering what the big deal is about the conductor, okay? Classical music novices wonder, audience members wonder, and even the orchestra members sometimes wonder, what's the role of the conductor? And it requires an explanation. As I said, the conductor is not just a time beater. That's sort of the beginning job. You have to learn conducting patterns. So if a piece is in 4/4, you conduct down, left, right, up. If it's in 3/4, it's down, right, up. There's different patterns. And I remember the first time I ever conducted an orchestra was in high school, when my high school music teacher was called from the rehearsal room for an important phone call, and he handed me the baton and he said, and we were doing Beethoven Symphony No. 8, which is in 3/4, the first movement. And he handed me the baton and said, you conduct it, I'll be right back. I've got to go get this phone call. I said, I don't know how to conduct. And he said, well, just make a triangle in the air and it'll work. So I stood there, bum, ba da beep, ba bum, ba 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 da ba 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 ba, and I was hooked because the sound kept coming at me. So the conducting patterns are important. Your right hand is important. It has a different responsibility than your left hand. The right hand does the conducting patterns. The left hand is very expressive, telling you to get louder or get softer or to shut up, all these different things that we do. The responsibility is, I think, the biggest responsibility of a conductor is to be a messenger for the composer. You need to understand the music and convey it through your gestures so that the musicians in the orchestra understand it perfectly. Okay, if I just make that triangle in the air, it's not telling you how loud I want it, how soft I want it, how I want the phrase to go. I'm just making that triangle and you know how fast I want it. Now, my belief of the job of a conductor, or what a conductor does, is that you look at a piece of music. Let's say, I'll just pick something up here. All right, so I've got this piece of music, and when you look at it, what you see are just little black dots on a page. I think that's quite a miracle. I think that the whole process is a miracle, that you look at little black dots on a page. The conductor looks at those little black dots, knows the history, knows the background, knows the composer, doesn't know the composer, but understands what kind of a composer they were. And by looking at those little black dots, I can lift off of the page what the composer felt, what the composer wanted. Somebody who lived 300 years ago, and they're telling me by those little black dots on the page what it is they want. So I pick that stuff up off of the paper, off of the sheet of music, and I internalize it. I'm feeling what the composer was feeling at that time. If I know all those things that I told you conductors need to know. And through my body, I make gestures that are going to communicate what I'm feeling to the orchestra. And if the orchestra is open to this communication and is paying attention and really wants to be there and really wants to make music, they're going to accept that and they're going to follow what I'm feeling. And then they make this music come out. The music then comes back to me, but it doesn't so much come back to me as it goes over me to the audience. And then the audience can feel what the composer meant for those little black dots on a page. And then it comes back to me because I'm feeling the audience being involved in all those little black dots and feeling what the composer wanted the music to be. And then we have created this energetic, I don't know, ambiance where all of us are feeling this at the same time. Now, when you listen to a recording of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and you hear one conducted by Leonard Bernstein, and you hear one conducted by Edo de Waard, or you hear one conducted by one of the great conductors of this generation, Madeline Schatz Harris, you will hear that those interpretations are all going to be different. And that's because the conductor is reading those little black dots a little bit differently. Now, who has the right interpretation? Who has the right to say? You know, unless it's completely against what the standards were of that time period. So how does the conductor serve as this messenger? I mean, I like to think of the conductor as a medium, you know. If you think of the term, this just came into my brain, this is brilliant. Well, if you think of the term conductor, it's a scientific term, and it's something through which energy passes, right? It brings energy from one spot to another spot. It creates this electricity, and that's what an orchestra conductor does. You pick up, I've got my plug, and I've plugged it into the little black dots on the page, and it goes through me, and then it's connected to the orchestra, and then it's connected to the audience, and then it comes back, and the energy is perfect. So how does the conductor serve as this messenger? It keeps the conductor keeps the orchestra in time and uses a stick to do that. Seems simple. That's usually what people think the conductor does. And then I've had people say, well, why? I mean, isn't the tempo marked in the music? I mean, it says fast, it says slow, it says, you know, drag, it says, you know, all that type of stuff. Well, if you have 50 people in an orchestra, fast is going to mean something different to each one of those orchestra members. And so the conductor is the person who decides exactly what fast means. For this particular piece. And as I said, that's going to be different for every conductor. Conductors originally for conducting, the conductors used a staff that they banged on the floor to keep the music together. And the advantage for it was that it was very loud and everybody heard it and they could stay together. And that was until Lully, who was a French composer who lived in the Baroque, early Baroque period, banged that staff through his foot, gave himself gangrene and died. And I think that after that, most conductors were afraid to bang that stick on the ground. So they, after that period of time, it went out of fashion kind of to conduct an orchestra. And then in the 18th century, it became important to use a little stick to conduct that was less dangerous. The key role of the orchestra today is primarily artistic. There are different names for the conductor. There's a music director, there's artistic director, and that is what the conductor is deciding on the artistic features of what's going on with the orchestra. You integrate the musical interpretations of all the musicians on stage into a bigger picture. And believe me, sometimes that's really hard to do. You know, so it's just not about beating the right pattern. It's how I add to my gestures and develop it to shape the music. And what that skill requires is psychology. You're dealing with 50 people who have their own ideas, many of them in, what time is this rehearsal going to be over? I really have to get home. You know, there's body language. You know, if a conductor is on the podium, it's kind of like, okay, you know, that's not going to get you what you want. Knowledge of history and a sensitivity to what it takes to make everybody human. You're dealing with people's humanity. So next time you see a conductor at work, take a closer look at their connection to their players and listen for the bigger picture of what's being created in the music. It's no wonder that conductors are sometimes just a little bit sweaty. Okay, I wanted to go on from what is a conductor to what is a section leader? What is a section leader? A section leader is the person who sits in the first chair of any section. We have strings, woodwinds, brass, percussion, and there's always one person who is chosen to be the section leader. And what does a section leader do? Because there's so much more to being an effective orchestra member than merely playing your instrument well. Teamwork is really, really important in an orchestra, and without teamwork, a cohesive interpretation of the music is impossible. So each player has his or her role. Everybody belongs to a division or section in the orchestra. And just as in any job, there are supervisors. So the main supervisor is the conductor. But then the supervisor has assistant supervisors, and those assistant supervisors are the section leaders. So what are the requirements for being a section leader, and what are their duties? The section leaders have to play their instruments well. And one of the most important aspects of being a section leader is the ability to communicate and to be listened to by the people in your section. The members of a section watch not only the conductor, but also the section leader. So that energy that I was talking about, it has to be interpreted by your section leader, because then they're going to communicate it to the rest of the section. The principal player leads with his or her body language, which helps the section along to be able to interpret the conductor. And the section leader is responsible for the performance level of the section. The principal or the section leader might make suggestions so that the section sounds cohesive. Hey, listen, guys, let's play that section. Let's play that up bow and that down bow. And then it'll come out. She's asking for an accent on a certain note. And if we play that down bow, it'll sound much better and she'll get what she wants. And then she'll stop bugging us about being wrong. Okay, so they do that. In the case of the string family, the concertmaster, who is the principal first violinist, will choose the bowings and phrasings and then pass his or her markings to the other string section leaders for them to imitate. The brass or woodwinds often play a melody together either in unison or in harmony, and the section leaders will consult with each other, like the principal flute will consult with the principal oboe or the principal clarinet or the principal bassoon and decide how they're going to do their breathing, their phrasing, their articulation and intonation to make it match, so that the conductor can then say, I don't like it that way, let's change it. But usually I usually agree with the section leaders. The section leader is a conduit between the conductor and the other players in the section. The principal is the direct line of communication from the conductor to the rest of the orchestra. If everyone were to ask a question or give an opinion to the conductor during rehearsal, there could be chaos, as we in this orchestra know. So it's always best to communicate with your section leader and then have the section leader either answer the question for you or ask the conductor. Sometimes the technique a conductor is asking for simply does not work on our instrument. I don't know. I really don't know a lot about bassoon, and I don't know a lot about tuba. I have studied all the other instruments, but if the bassoonist tells me that that is actually impossible, then we'll talk about it and I'll see how I can get what I want through their type of technique. They explain it to me. I do have to say that some conductors are more receptive to interpretive suggestions than others, as you can well imagine. I have played in orchestras under dictators that you don't feel free playing at all. You have to do exactly what they want. So that tells you what a section leader is. And my last thing is, what is a board of directors? So we have a board of directors, we have a symphony, we have the section leaders. And the board sets all the laws, all the ways that the organization is going to be run. How many people we're going to have on the board, who's going to be the music director, who's going to be the assistant conductor. They're responsible for publicity, for getting people into the seats during the concerts. They plan receptions, fundraisers, and most boards, the main thing they have is the fiduciary responsibilities. And that involves raising money to keep the organization afloat and writing grants. Also, one of the biggest things that I think is the board of directors attend the concerts to support the orchestra. In our organization, that's not a problem because most of our board of directors are members of the orchestra, so they have to be there. So again, we have the board who does the rule making. They are in contact with the music director, which is very important, so that the music director is keeping them abreast of what's going on in the orchestra. But again, in our organization, that's not a problem. They're usually there at the rehearsals, and they raise money. They keep the thing afloat, and they hire the music director and the assistant conductor, and they attend the orchestra. None of the stuff that I've told you about the orchestra conductor, the section leaders, or the board I haven't told you everything they do. It's a very big job. We're really lucky because we have a board, a music director, an assistant conductor, and section leaders who all want the best and who are all very good. And so we have a great organization. And I'm really proud to be working with this group. And I will take any questions that any of you might have.
Haven't there been orchestras that have attempted to play without conductors?
Yes. Yes. And you would never see 100-piece orchestra play without conductors. But like the Orpheus, it's a small group.
St. Paul Chamber Orchestra.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. But you never see a very large orchestra without a conductor.
No.
But then you know what happens? The concertmaster takes over the role of being the conductor and is conducting in a different way, from the instrument. And sometimes it's from the harpsichord or from the piano. But there's always somebody leading, even if there's not somebody with a stick. So that if it's the concertmaster, as in the Orpheus ensemble, and their concertmasters change all the time. So they rotate. they will be leading, they'll be doing the very same things that I'm talking about that I do from the podium, just not doing the stick.
Are there any orchestras that rotate section leaders?
Yes. Mhm. You know, if you're going in a professional orchestra, you've got, let's say you have 3 of each of the woodwinds, you've got 3 players that are all really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they can rotate. Oh, and actually in our orchestra, the flutes rotate.
And so do the horns sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. Well, of course. How can I leave them out? And our bass section always thinks that each one of them is the section leader. So, you know. I'm joking, Bob. I'm joking. Anything else?
There's a book that I'm in process of reading called The Maestro Myth by a man named Lebrecht.
Mhm.
And it's a very interesting history of how conducting for the orchestra developed. But it will ruin your impression of people like Toscanini and Furtwängler and
Yes, yes. I've got great orchestra jokes to tell you, but I won't do that here.
So you said that the members should be asking the section leader rather than them all asking you. How do you balance asking your section leader with no talking?
You can ask your section leader, but what happens in rehearsal, and that's one of my pet peeves, is that I'm trying to say something and then people are talking to each other. If you really need to ask a question, you do it quietly, because it's distracting if you're really loud and I'm trying to talk to the orchestra. I think one of the things that's really important for a conductor, and many of you might disagree with me, but I think humor. I think humor is important, and you've got 2 of us that, well, we're funny. We look funny. We talk funny.
well, I thought you did a very good job of dealing with your left-handed conducting when you first started with the orchestra.
Yeah, well, I had just had the shoulder surgery. That was really funny. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was going to make a remark back to Aaron's comments about practicing. One of the things that I did when I was trying to really get back onto the instrument after 40 years off was simply to leave the instrument set up at some place where I could simply walk up, pick it up, play for a little while until my endurance gave out, and then put it down, go do something else, and come back and do it again. And it works.
Mm-hmm. Feel free to reply, Aaron, if you want.
I'm so sorry. I'm in the midst of swallowing some dinner here, but no, I'm glad to hear that that was that worked for you. I've definitely had success with that and heard of people having success with that approach. And again, it's tough. It doesn't work necessarily for all instruments. You know, clarinet, of course, you've got to take care of your reeds and you've got to, wet them. And so, but you can have, if you're comfortable, if you know your instrument is swabbed out well when you're done, it's dry, and you've got a clarinet stand and you're comfortable leaving it out somewhere in the corner of the room where it won't get knocked over, it's still quicker to pop the reed in and go. So thank you.
I often leave my flute sitting on the piano, and then I'm always afraid the cat's going to walk on it. So far, she has managed to avoid that, but you never know. I'm afraid she's going to step on it wrong and bend a key or something.
That's why I always toss that out there with that enormous caveat. In some environments, it works beautifully. Not for all, though.
It's what I was thinking of when you said it.
You can see where I leave my instrument.
Well, Madeline and Aaron, I think this was great. I really enjoyed both of your presentations, totally different from each other. And I thought they were both I really enjoyed them.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And it seems to have worked to stream this onto Facebook Live, which should then mean it will continue to be available. So we should be able to direct people to it if they would like to be able to watch it later. And then I think Liz will attempt to set up a YouTube channel to put the recording on. But it looks like that's going to be something that we can offer in the future. And actually, I'm going to stop that stream right now.